So today, the NHL controversially handled the situation poorly in the game between Columbus and Carolina, right? So again, we get into this whole argument over what the NHL did. Now, I think the NHL broke its own rule by rescinding a penalty. So there's a goal. It's challenged for being offside. They very quickly reviewed it very, very quickly and said, nope, it's onside. Delay a game penalty. And so the goal counted, and then in between periods, they go, oh, wait, no, that was offside, so they rescinded the rest of the penalty. That's the thing the NHL did differently. But here's the thing. The goal doesn't come off the board because, for the most part, if the puck is dropped, the goal stays. So that's why if there's a goal scored and they think you might challenge it, they give a coach as much time as possible. Sometimes a ridiculous amount of time is given to a coach before they drop the puck, because when the puck is dropped, as a general rule, that goal stands. That's it. That has been a rule forever. That puck's dropped, goal stands. And I know there's people who are upset about it. This is not the first time. To me, it's the first time the NHL has come out and said, whoops, in the middle of the game. They'll say whoops after the game. That's happened before where they go, yeah, that shouldn't have counted. Oh, well, whoops. But they don't normally do it during a game. Normally during a game, they're getting themselves ready to describe why this wrong call was right. So that's unusual. But again, if a puck is in the net at 17:56 and the play starts up again after the review, even if the review is wrong, that goal's going to stay on the board. And it, again, do I agree with that? No. No, I'm saying straight out I don't agree with it. But there are a lot of things on this board that I don't necessarily agree with. Now, the weird thing is I did the video just as a joke, the great truths the NHL won't tell you. These to me are kind of almost like a 10 commandments of the NHL. So pucks drop, goal stays. That's pretty much it. Which also gets into number 2, which is no rule fixes. Notice I said putting mostly during the season. So they make rule changes during the off season, and then during the season, even if we as fans, we go, wow, there's a big, giant problem with these rules this year, the NHL won't change it. So, for instance, when they decided, well, we'll shrink down the neutral zone, and it didn't work. They didn't change the neutral zone back to the right size until after the season was over. They don't make changes in the game in the middle of the season. And yet, the reason I'm saying mostly is, one example I'll use is Matt Calvert. So Matt Calvert gets hurt on a play against Vancouver. The play continued, right? The play continued while everybody's horrified, and the puck ends up in the net. And Colorado fans are rightfully outraged. Tuukka Rask throws a blade, is showing the referee, I don't have the blade on my skate. Puck goes in the net. The NHL never came out and said we're changing the rule. But now, when a player gets hurt by a puck, immediately the whistle goes. Every time. I have not seen that since, where if a guy gets hurt with the puck and both teams notice it, that a referee doesn't immediately blow the play down. And now if a goalie throws his blade, immediately they call for the whistle, even though the rule book didn't change. The rule book didn't change, but referees clearly were sat down by the NHL and told, we need you to call this way. This is what we want. So they won't publicly come out and say we're changing things. And for the most part, they won't make changes. So if there's certain suspensions that you want to see happen and certain ones that you think are over the top and penalties that you think that's ridiculous how they're calling it, usually the rules won't change until the offseason. The biggest example I would use is San Jose Vegas Game 7, and it's a major penalty and everything goes all, it blows up and the whole NHL is clearly thrown into a mess because it shouldn't have been a major. And that's something the NHL admitted. And if I know there's people who are still going to argue in the comment section below, no, it was a major. The NHL admitted it wasn't a major when they changed the rules in the offseason and made it so a 5-minute penalty, referees can now review those and drop them to 2-minute penalties. You can't make it so the player doesn't get a penalty at all, but you can drop it to a 2-minute penalty if you see fit. So that's a rule change that was made as sort of the NHL admitting they're wrong, without coming out publicly and saying they're wrong. I know there were rumors that they privately told Vegas they had been wrong, and all this, but to my knowledge, publicly they never said it. Number three, I think is an important one because I've seen a lot of complaints lately about head hits, right? So here's the thing. If you throw a hit and the head is the primary point of contact, and the NHL deems you could not have taken another route, you absolutely didn't have a choice, you're probably okay. If it's a collision, you're probably okay. But if you could have taken another route, if you had time to change your angle, then you might be looking at a suspension. But the head has to be the primary point of contact. So when you see a guy go in and throw a check and he hits him in the chest with his shoulder, and then it comes up and it hits the guy in the face or in the jaw, it's still ugly and it's still violent. But the NHL isn't trying to get head hits out of the game. It was a couple years ago that Gary Bettman was asked about it, and he said we can't. Because of the nature of the game, because of how fast it is, and because of all the hitting, we can't take all head hits. You can't punish every single hit that happens to connect with the head. And if you think about the concussion standard for the NHL, that's gotten better. The concussion spotters are getting guys out of the game. But the NHL still has never actually said they agree that repeated concussions from playing professional hockey lead to problems after your career is done. They've never actually publicly come out and said, we agree this is an issue. The NFL eventually begrudgingly got dragged over that line. The NHL has not. And even for the NFL, there are players who say, hey, look, I suffered a concussion and I've got these problems. And the NFL goes, there's a process by which they review them, and they might drag their feet a little bit as to whether or not these guys get compensated. So professional sports is slowly coming around, but the NHL, head hits to them are okay. Is the principal point of contact the head, and could you have avoided it? So if it's a violent, horrible hit, they may look at that and go, yeah, that's a violent hit. That's a highlight reel hit. We can use that in our promotional materials. And yeah, a guy got hurt, but oh well. So that's just the way that they do it. Number four, because people always complain about this too, like, well, that ref should never work again. This ref shouldn't be calling games. The NHL has a process by which they review referees in season. They review referees during playoffs. They are constantly evaluating referees, the calls they're making and the calls they're not. For instance, yesterday there was the game between Arizona and St. Louis, and that might have been the worst officiated game I've seen this season. Just personally, that was my opinion of it. And it's penalties. Both teams took penalties that weren't penalties. So the NHL can look at that and can sit them down with the head of officiating and say, look, here's what you called. That's not a penalty. We don't want that. And so those referees can actually be disciplined, and there are steps that the NHL can take by which a referee could find themselves not calling games, especially when it comes to playoffs. When you get to playoffs and you need fewer referees, the idea is it's supposed to be the better referees who have the better grades during the year that continue on. And so when you get to the Stanley Cup final, you're supposed to have the best referees. That's why, looking back, I can remember Kerry Fraser, Brian McCreary, Bill McCreary, sorry, and Andy Van Hellemond were the three that always stood out to me, where you knew what kind of game you were going to get by how they called the game. And that was when there was one referee. And I think players had a better idea of what they could and couldn't get away with, which is sometimes lacking right now, right? So you go, it's Van Hellemond. Well, they're going to let him play tonight. Kerry Fraser. I don't know. Fraser calls a little bit more than Van Hellemond does. But again, the discipline is really technically not made public very often. There have been times where they've said this referee's not calling any more games this year, and I'm always surprised by that. Number five, the league likes fighting, so there's always concerns like the league's trying to get fighting out of the game. No, it's not. There's never been any movement by owners, by GMs, by players, by Gary Bettman himself. There's never been any movement where they've said we really need to get fighting out of the game. The game has evolved to where your 3-minute a night enforcer no longer has a place in the game. If you can't skate, if you can't take a regular shift, they don't have a spot for you in the lineup. So there are a couple of guys who could qualify as enforcer-ish, like Zach Ronaldo, Nick Delorier with the Anaheim Ducks, but they can still play. At least they can play a more regular shift than you might have seen your 3 minutes a night enforcer back in the day. But the league doesn't discourage fighting. We don't see guys getting suspended for fighting. We don't see situations where that's an issue. And yet guys punch each other in the head all the time. So again, if you're coming back to head injuries, NHL, they just, oh, we clocked him. That was a good shot he gave him. And there's never any kind of suspension for that. And fights can get used in promotional materials from the National Hockey League. Next up on the board, the league likes the shootout, which is a debate we have as fans. I personally, I miss it. I miss when you'd have a five-minute overtime and then, all right, it's a tie game. I'm not a fan of the shootout because I don't think it's hockey. I think it's just a skill competition. You don't see the National Basketball Association go, okay, well, it's been a 5-minute overtime. Now we're going to have a free throw contest. You don't see baseball go to a home run hitting contest. And you don't see football have some kind of a field goal kickoff thing like, all right, so from the 40, they both hit it. Can they both hit it from the 45? It makes, to me anyways, I'm not a fan of the shootout as a way to decide games. As long as it's not being used to decide playoff games, I've kind of begrudgingly accepted it. But here's the other part. I've seen people say, well, the NHL should just prolong overtime. And then you have fewer shootouts. The problem with that is the NHLPA wouldn't want that. The NHLPA doesn't want 10-minute overtime periods. When you consider back-to-back games, you consider a lot of games can go into overtime. That's a lot more wear and tear. And I don't think the NHLPA is going to sign off on that. And you have to have both sides signing off on it. And then there's, how much later do you want all the games to go, this kind of thing. And there are logistical names. And then again, after the 10-minute overtime, you're still going to a shootout, right? So I don't see the shootout going anywhere. Rivalry games. So I always see this every year, which is I'm tired of so-and-so playing against so-and-so for the playoffs. I'm tired of seeing these guys play each other all the time. The NHL's not, and neither are the networks that the NHL works to please and make sure they get more money from. A good example would be Pittsburgh and Washington. You might look at that and go, man, are we seeing Pittsburgh and Washington again? Ugh. I'd rather see, and two teams against each other that you never see against each other. The league and the networks would look at that and go, we've got Crosby and Ovechkin, we can market that. So really, the rivalry games and series, and the reason that we have divisional series rather than the old 1 versus 8, 2 versus 7 is money. The NHL looks at that and says, all right, we can market this. And the networks themselves were not happy with the 1 versus 8, 2 versus 7 setup because you couldn't really pre-advertise for series because you didn't really know who was going to play who until you... So it was harder to pre-plan and get people excited about it. So this way with divisional playoffs, well, you know who's going to meet who in the next round. You're aware. So you can maybe, pre-advertise a little bit. And so it's something that the NHL likes, the networks like. Honestly, as an old man from the 80s, I like it too. I think some of the best playoffs I ever saw were division rivalries. And sometimes you'd have a team that was 45 points behind the other team they're playing in the playoffs. But because they knew that team, once you get into that best of 7 series, you never knew who was really going to win. A hard cap. I've seen this argument too. So with the flat cap and 81.5 million, I've seen people say, if you got rid of the hard cap and you just had like a situation where you had like the luxury tax like you have in baseball, or if they just, the hard cap just makes things so much more difficult. If you got rid of the hard cap and you put in a luxury tax situation, I can almost guarantee that we would be in a situation where the next time there's some kind of a collective bargaining problem, you're more likely to lose a season. When that hard cap comes in, it prevents teams like New York, Detroit, Toronto, Montreal from spending way more money than the other teams. I'm just using them as examples. But if you make it so there's some kind of a luxury tax situation where, Toronto can go over, they will. Toronto can print money with the amount that they make. But for other teams, and again, it's Florida, to some extent it's Winnipeg as well, and some of the smaller markets, it's going to be harder for them to compete. And so those owners might be kind of a little bit riled up because now they're having to spend more money to try to compete with these other luxury teams. A hard cap, I really think, is a big part of how we've avoided losing another season since the hard cap came in. We've had one short season, which was 2012-2013, due to labor unrest. But it was just the owners getting that last little bit of a tweak to the hard cap. And now I think we're set. I think we're set that the revenues are 50-50, and I don't think there's any chance that they'll change the cap. Because again, I know that especially with the flat cap and how many teams are right up against it and they can't spend money, it's tough right now, but I can't see it changing. Also, as a related item, players versus owners. The reality is the owners will almost always win that battle because it's billionaires versus millionaires. So when the owners want something and you go, I hope the players fight for this, and then they end up caving in, there's a reason. They cave in because they just don't have the same amount of resources as the owners do. The owners can just throw their arms in the air and go, all right, well, that's fine. And very often owners will have other businesses, they'll have other sources of income, and maybe they're even using their sports teams to write things off, right? And for players, this is their career. This is who they are. This is what they've spent their entire life planning for. So if it's a waiting game, owners are going to win. If it's a money issue, owners are going to win. The players have done very, very well for themselves in that they make a lot more money now than they did. And for the owners, they're making a lot more money than they used to as well. I know that's dropped over the last 12 months, but it's dropped for everybody, so it's not like the NHL is alone in this. But this is why Gary Bettman's not going anywhere. Gary Bettman makes the owners a ton of money. Are you going to fire the guy who just made your company an extra $1 billion over the last 20 years? I'm just using that as a round number. No. You're going to look at him and go, well, yeah, we make twice as much now as we did when you took over, but what else have you done? No, they're just going to look at that and go, all right, so you're keeping things under control. There were some speed bumps to getting this season that we're in going because owners weren't happy about the CBA being extended and felt Bettman kind of pulled a fast one on them just to make this season happen, and he did. But it's not such an egregious problem that owners are going to try to get rid of Bettman. I think they understand we've made a lot of money. He kind of put one past us. We'll keep an eye on it, but he still made us a ton of money. So that's still, and they're still protected. In this season, the losses are still being absorbed equally by the owners and the players. So I don't think there's any desire to see him go anywhere if you're an owner right now. And I wanted to end with this one because it's always a topic of conversation. And anytime I do a video where I talk about teams moving, those videos always do very, very well. Even if I'm just standing in front of a board like this and I'm saying, yeah, no teams are moving, those videos do very, very well. The reality is no team is moving. There is an asterisk because it's possible that the Arizona Coyotes could move somewhere else in the state. That Glendale, that arena doesn't work, and so they move out of Gila River and move somewhere else. The preference of the NHL has been clear from day one when they moved to Phoenix. They want to stay in the state of Arizona. I think they feel that hockey can work in the desert. If anything, the success in Vegas has shown them it can. So that's just backed up that belief for them. It's a matter of having the right owner, which now they believe they do with Alex Mariuello. And now it's a matter of finding the right arena deal or the right arena in general. But they want to stay in that area. Yes, it's possible they end up in Houston. Yes, it's possible something like that happens, but not over the short term. And expansion is done. I would say that the economic downturn has really made that quite apparent. There will not be any more expansion. Nobody's walking up to them with 650 million American right now to say, hey, can you put a team in Kansas City? Hey, can you put a team in Quebec? Nobody's doing that right now. Until the economy recovers and we've got full stands and the arenas are just jumping and you're making all kinds of money from concessions and parking again, we're not going to see any kind of an expansion, even rumored. And yeah, the idea of teams moving, Florida has a very good agreement with their building, and they're there for at least the next, I'll say 2 or 3 years minimum. And even if Florida said, all right, it's not working in Sunrise, the NHL would try to find a way to either have them in Miami or somewhere else in southern Florida where they feel it's going to work. I don't think they want out of that market either. So there you go. Just 10 things I wanted to go over because, again, it starts with the Columbus game today and the discussion there. And again, to me, that just states what the NHL has always done. Once the puck is dropped, the goal stays. You don't take a goal off the board. And yeah, and I know people don't like it, but that's always been the rule. I cannot think of a time where the NHL's called in after a puck's dropped and said, actually, you guys shouldn't have counted that goal and pulled it off the board and then reset the clock. But it is interesting. I understand why people are upset. I know Laine was upset today, said it's the biggest joke he's ever seen. But the NHL does tend to kind of paint themselves into these corners. And if there's going to be any kind of a rule fix, look for it this summer. So, all right, there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support along the way. And hey, I'll talk to you again soon.